Hey everyone, George here. Welcome back to my channel, The Art of Water. I want to talk to you today about some beginner's mistakes that I kind of found out when I was getting into this hobby, probably 10, 15 years ago. So many things have changed, but so many things have remained the same as well. So one of the first things I want to talk about is the type of aquarium that you're going to set up. Most people these days are really into the nano aquariums or 10 gallons or smaller, and that's great. I think that those are very easy aquariums to take care of for beginners, and they do have a ton of things out there now that make that certainly a very easy aquarium to care for. One of the very first things that I wanted to talk about was soil type in your aquarium. A lot of people try to start out an aquarium with gravel or sand and those sorts of things. And if you're going to have a planted tank, that's just not going to work for you. You really need to have a dirt substrate of some kind. I love fluval stratum. It is one of the best, I think, products out there for growing plants. The second thing I want to say is that if you are growing plants, try to grow low light plants at first so that you can get a foothold on where you want to go with the hobby and what you want to do. Those would include things like crypts or nubius, some swords, lots of different kinds of plants that I could tell you about, but pretty much be looking for low light plants. When I say low light plants, I'm talking about plants that don't require very much light at all and will grow in very low light conditions. One of the main things that people do is they don't put enough plants in their tanks to start out, and they end up with algae problems. Now, you have to remember that your tanks are competing with your plants are competing with algae for nutrients. So the more plants that you put in your tank, of course, the better your results you're going to get of not having algae issues right off. Now, this is an aquarium that's been set up for quite some time, but I had rearranged it here recently and rescaped it because I put these peacock gudgeons in here. Now, also, I recommend to keep the algae down, 2 different kinds of algae eater type fish. Number one would be the autocynklid. Those are great little guys for cleaning up the brown algae that is going to be common in the first 3 to 4 months of your tank if you don't have a lot of plants. If you do have a lot of plants, you may not see that at all, but they will keep algae at bay. The second type of algae eater is the Siamese algae eater, which are much more aggressive algae eaters. They will eat different kinds of algae, and including blackbeard and those kinds of things, which seem to plague tanks over time. The most important thing to remember is that whatever you're putting into your tank, as far as when you're first planting it, plant as much as you possibly can, because the more plants that you put in that tank to begin with, the better off you're going to be on fighting the algae issue. The second thing, lighting. The lighting that comes with your aquarium may be sufficient, it may not be sufficient, it may be too much, or it may not be enough. So what you have to do is really figure out whether or not you are getting the right kind of lighting. Now, what I suggest is get a light meter of some kind and look at the par by placing that meter in the bottom of your tank as it looks upwards, as to see what kind of par your light is giving off, to see if your plants are getting sufficient light or getting too much light for the type of plants that they are. As I said, low light plants, which I think are the most important things to start out with, are going to really be sensitive to that kind of thing. And algae issues, like I said, are going to be very, very possible if you don't have enough plants in your tank and you don't have a sufficient amount of algae eaters, and too much light. So also keeping your chemicals balanced in your tank, making sure that your tank is cycled real well. Once the cycle takes place and you add fish to your tank, I truly recommend doing 50% water changes for the first week or two daily. And I'm serious about that, daily. I know that seems like a lot, but if you've got a small 5-gallon tank like this one is, you're going to find that that's not a real hard thing to do. It takes about 10 minutes, 15 minutes a day to do that. And you will really be doing yourself a favor, because you're going to take a lot of the leaching stuff that comes out of these soils out of there, and not give algae that foothold. You're going to be putting good clean water into these tanks. As you can see, this water here is absolutely crystal clear, and that is because even though I'm through the cycle and I'm not too concerned about large water changes, about every 2 days I do 1/4 of a water change in these tanks, just to make sure that these plants are getting the best possible start, and keeping things nice and clean in there. Now, one of the other things I want to talk about that people don't really think about is they overload their tanks. They overload their bio system by putting way too many fish in there. You can really push the limits on this somewhat if you're careful, if you've got a lot of good algae eaters in there and you're doing a lot of water changes. If you're not doing a lot of water changes, you're going to have your biosystem become really, really overtaken by ammonia and nitrites and nitrates, and that's not going to be good. So if you're going to keep a small tank like this, you're going to have to keep in mind that water changes are going to be a regular part of your routine, and that routine is going to be every other day, 1/4. Even after you get past the 50% water changes when your tank first starts up and you first start putting fish in there, after a couple of weeks of doing that, you're going to have to keep up with those 1/4 water changes every single day. If you're not interested in doing that, you're going to run into a lot of problems and a lot of heartaches that you can avoid by just doing the water changes. Now, I don't run CO2 much anymore. I used to run it quite a bit. I find that my plants do just fine, these low light plants, in the type of lighting that I have them in, and a good balance of clean water in the tanks really, really helps to make all of this sort of moot. If you're very careful and you're watching what you're doing, you can sure save yourself a lot of heartaches. And you can see these little algae eaters here are really going to town in here, cleaning up the glass. Also, another type of thing that people don't think about is putting snails in there and shrimp. Now, this particular tank would not be good for shrimp because they would probably get eaten by some of these peacock gudgeons. What was that? Anyways, peacock gudgeons. So you got to be very careful about that, and watch which kind of invertebrates you put in here. Now, I do have some snails in this tank as well. I think nitrite snails are the best to go with. They come in a variety of different colors and can really look very nice in your tank. So, just to kind of recap what we talked about here and to give you some ideas, if you watch these guys at the bottom here, how hard he's working on keeping these plants top-notch clean and that sort of thing, you're going to really find that if you follow some of the things that I just talked about, you're going to really, really, really enjoy the hobby, and you're not going to have all the heartaches that a lot of people have because they're impatient or they just don't want to do the work. So keeping a lot of plants in your tank, low light plants like anubias, ferns, swords, lots of different carpeting plants that are low light. There's so many out there that are offered. And in this particular tank, I don't have any floating plants, but if you can find some floaters out there that sort of filter the light through your tank and keep that intensity down, that's also a great source of adding plants in there. They're going to eat up the nutrients in your tank and keep you from having algae issues. So, again, recapping the whole thing, lots of plants, low light, dirt soil, not gravel, but something that's a very good nutrient-rich soil, and also doing those water changes, man. You're going to find that if you do that, you're going to be a happy guy, and you're going to love the hobby, and you're going to really appreciate listening to this video and getting these tips so that you can avoid all the problems that a lot of people tend to have when they first start out. Anyways, this is George with The Art of Water. We'll talk again real soon.